This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess and Jamal.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we're broadcasting again from the Bay Area, Northern California, under really difficult circumstances as usual. I mean, we are in a red flag warning, just for our listeners outside of the Bay who are paying attention. We have a red flag warning, which means extremely high fire danger right now. So in the midst of our pandemic, we are also in the midst of a grave fire danger. So the situation in the Bay Area remains very tenuous. In addition, we're beginning to see that the United States, basically 45 of the 50 states are experiencing some to significant increases in COVID cases, and 5 states have almost maxed out on their ICU beds. It looks like, Jamal, we're in the midst of this second wave of COVID infection. It's not getting better. We're not turning the corner. Things are very bleak from my perspective. Having said all that, the situation in the Arab world, especially in Palestine, continues to be very equally on fire. I think there's a red flag warning in Palestine, Jamal. We're in the middle of the olive harvest season in Palestine, and that's always very dangerous time for Palestinian farmers.
That's right, Jess, and we'll be talking about this. And they've been coming under heavy attacks by Israeli colonial settlers, which happens like clockwork every year. Palestinians, how important olives and olive oil for Palestinians. That's probably the most important product, not only because they've grown these trees for hundreds of years. Some of those trees are even more than 1,000 years old.
Right.
But also it's more of a spiritual ritual for Palestinian farmers, and also from people from the cities who go every single year in October and volunteer and work with these farmers to harvest their olive trees. And then afterwards, some will be used for olives. And then, of course, olive oil in Palestine, or Palestinian olive oil, is one of the best rated
in the world.
And settlers have been going for many years, torching these olive trees, uprooting them, attacking the farmers, trying to scare them away. So we'll talk about this a little bit later on.
But we're also in the midst of another pandemic, Jamal, and that's the pandemic of Islamophobia and anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bigotry, not just here in the United States, but apparently in France, the attacks and the viciousness and the Islamophobia is reaching even greater heights within the political and judicial system.
That's right, Jess. So, in talking about pandemics, and also France is going through its second wave.
Yeah, they're shutting down Paris.
So they're shutting down. They've lost control pretty much. So we're going to be. I've actually finished talking to a guest in France just a few minutes ago. Chafika Attalai, and Chafika is the international director from this organization that combats Islamophobia. It's Collectif Contre L'Islamophobie en France, CCIF. And we've had her on the show about a year ago.
I remember.
And now things have gotten much worse because there is a new bill now in the government that's going to get voted on, basically criminalizing many of these Muslim institutions and mosques. In fact, she told me as we were talking, some of those organizations were getting raided by the French police and being searched. Also, like I've said, the Minister of Interior put this new bill, and then President Macron has been making all kinds of Islamophobic statements lately, saying that Islam needs reform, and like all of a sudden he's the reformer. He's the reformer of Islam, And we talk about this, but also you'll find out, of course, this has a lot to do with his popularity ratings, which is basically has been sinking since his handling, just like Trump, of the COVID-19, and of course the terrible, terrible economy that France has been facing. So let's listen and watch Chafika Attalai. Recently in France, President Emmanuel Macron has unveiled a plan to defend France's secular values against what he termed as Islamist radicalism, saying that the religion was in crisis all over the world, prompting a backlash from Muslim activists. A new bill aiming at strengthening secularism, laïcité, and reinforcing Republican principles was introduced by the Ministry of the Interior. According to French Muslim activists, the bill is overtly Islamophobic and intervenes in a pre-existing climate of suspicion towards Muslim communities and bans of regular Muslim practices. Joining us from France to discuss this and more, Chafika Attalai, International Project Manager at CCIF, Collectif Contre L'Islamophobie en France. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Chafika. First, quickly describe what your organization is all about to our listeners.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again on your show. Frankly, I'd rather prefer to come and talk here in your show in a total different context, but here we are. We Muslim people are facing today real difficulties in France. And so once again, thank you, Jamal, for offering me the possibility to share with the audience those difficulties. So the CCIF is the Collective Against Islamophobia in France. You said it well. We are an organization that fights Islamophobia directly on the field for almost 20 years now. We have a bunch of jurists, we have lawyers that freely legally help, that provide legal assistance to the victims of Islamophobia by using the mediation when there is a discrimination and when there is an act of discrimination. We use the mediation. We remind the law to the discriminants, but also going to the court when the case is more serious. So this is basically the legal assistance. We have a hotline. And we welcome the calls of the victims of Islamophobia. We open their cases, and this allows us to record the data of Islamophobia in France.
So earlier, I mean, I know the laïcité, when they started this whole concept, Muslims felt that this was discriminatory against them. Especially, there was like this whole campaign against the burqa for a while under the previous administration. And now, I mean, like I'm looking at it, why are they introducing this new bill? They've already have it in the law, laïcité, and it created a lot of, discrimination against Muslim, especially Muslim women going to public universities, being in public buildings. And I've recently read that there was a big outcry in the parliament because there was a woman who attended the National Assembly hearing. And then other parliamentarians staged a walkout because she was wearing a hijab. They were like, "Oh my God, there's a woman with a hijab. We must vacate the building." I mean, this is insane. I mean, even here for us in the United States, we have Islamophobia, but really not at this level that when a woman walks into a public building wearing a hijab, this becomes a public outcry.
And I really hope that it will never reach this level in the United States. But well, this is a good insight of the insanity which is ongoing in France. And so yeah, there was this whole story around this student. Her name is Mariam Pushtu. And so she attended she was in this institution for her knowledge, and it was nothing to see with the Muslim women or with the Islamophobia. It was to see with her own knowledge as being a syndicalist, as being the president of a student association. And so finally she was targeted for her religious sign, and so some people were outraged, and then they decided to go out from the court. This is the kind of situation that happens in France on a daily basis. And you talked about this law, this bill of law, because right now it's still a bill, but we know for sure that it will be a law. This is what is frightening us. So, if I may, I would like to give some context on how we finally reach this level of having this kind of bill that will, in a couple of months, that will be passed into a law. So, if I may, I would like to give some context. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Amazing, thank you. So in October 2019 was a turning point. It was a turning point in the semantic shift and in the apprehension of the French government's notion of radicalization. Why? Because I'm sure you remember that in October 2019, there was the Paris prefecture attacks, okay, by terrorism, by a terrorist that left, unfortunately, 4 people dead. All right.
Right.
The former minister of the Interior, Christophe Castaner, he did react, and he delivered at that time a speech where he was calling the French society, us people, for the automatic reporting of anyone suspected of radicalization. You know what it means. It means
so he's telling all the public basically to spy on their neighbors.
Exactly. You have to denounce your neighbor. You have to denounce the bad Muslim. Okay. But what is more appalling is what he describes to be a radicalized person. This is the problematic. So I'm quoting his words. He said that, first, he evoked a notion that will have significant impact on Muslims. It's the notion of weak signals of radicalization, okay? And what he described by weak signals of radicalization is merely the wearing of a beard, the wearing of a hijab, of a niqab. It's the ostentatious practice of ritual prayer. So basically praying five times a day. And also what he calls a rigorous religious practice. And when this practice is exacerbated during the month of Ramadan. So I'm sure everybody's understanding the issues here, right?
So let me get this right to our listeners. Yeah. So if you live next door to me and I don't like the way you look because you wear the hijab, or if you're a Muslim man with a beard, or if I see you going to the mosque to pray, then I can drop the dime on you. This is the expression we use here in the United States. I can pick up the phone and call the police security and say, look, there is a radical Muslim that lives next door to me, right?
Basically, because his description was really confusing. Because we as a Muslim were appalled when we heard. I remember when we heard the speech of Christophe Castaner at that time, and that he was describing basically me or my father or my neighbor Muslim. It was frightening. And so what is more frightening is this blatant criminalization of regular and peaceful Muslim practices, regular and peaceful practices of the Muslim religion. And also by doing so and by speaking like this, he's reinforcing the climate of suspicion towards the Muslims, the climate of suspicion that was already existing. And yeah, basically, and also I wanted to add that it was the words of the former Minister of the Interior, but it has been followed by our dear President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron. And so when you have the president himself implementing this strategy, pronouncing this kind of words, because in the end of October, Emmanuel Macron, the president of the French Republic, he also kind of paved the way to the suspicion, to the stigmatization towards the Muslims, because he would pronounce such a martial speech against the Muslims, using terms as Islamist Hydra. You know what is Hydra, right? It's this mythological monster with several heads that won't stop having heads growing as
from Greek mythology, right?
Yeah, and he would basically qualify us, the French Muslim, as monsters. Islamist Hydra. Do you see the level here? It's not.
Well,
it's not.
In his speech, he also claimed he was seeking to liberate Islam in France from foreign influences by improving oversight of mosque financing. So he's claiming that, let's just remind our listeners, you are French by birth, by your family is French and whatever. So now he's basically claiming that, you receive financing from outside to go to the mosque and you have influences from the outside. So he's not really recognizing you as a complete French, right? Because that's the claim. Now let me ask something quickly and before we go to this. We used to hear this kind of language from Marie Le Pen and her father, her late father. Now I'm seeing like Macron. I mean, does this have anything to do because his popularity is low? I mean, he's trying to appeal to the far right, because I looked at his polls and he's polling very, very low. I mean, his ratings are very low. Does this have anything to do with it?
I don't know if I should talk about any conspirationalist theory. I don't know if it has to be with it. It has to see with the COVID-19, with the social inequalities, with the social crisis. I don't know if it has to see with his popular rating, but I know that indeed this move could be attributed to the far right. And I was thinking, I think yesterday I was speaking with a colleague and I was like, I'm not sure if there would have been Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National at the head of our government. I'm not sure if they would have enabled this kind of bill. And here we are with a so-called centrist president, and we have this kind of super freedom-destroying law. So yeah, I mean that's what kind of shocked me, because he came, like he's centrist, or even sometimes tries to kind of court the liberal party, like he's progressive and whatever, and yet
his language, I haven't seen his language. I only heard it from Marie Le Pen in the past and from her late father. And it's kind of very astonishing to hear, like, what does he want? He wants to liberate Islam. Why does he find it his job to liberate Islam, for example? I mean, what role does France, as a previous colonial power, want to liberate Islam from what?
Basically, it has no role. It has no basis. And it isn't the role at all from the government to have any interference in the religious matters, in the individual. It's a freedom. It's a basic freedom of the French and of everybody. But above all, in France, it's a basic freedom to have your own religion and to make it personal and not some matter of and regulated and governed by the state. And this was supposed to be covered by the law on laissez-faire, and when we will speak a bit deeply of the bill and what it contains, you will see that now, yes, it's you feel like it's the role of the state to save France from the bad Muslims and from the bad Islam. And they feel it this way. They use it as an excuse, terrorism, making this basic and huge confusion between Islam and terrorism. But this is enough for them. Politically speaking, it's enough to combat Islam from France and to interfere into the religious matters.
Let's give our viewers and listeners some context here. Islam is the second largest religion in France. It is the second largest religion in France, and I think population-wise, Muslims comprise about 7-8% of the population, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And then the failing of the government, because I think it has also a lot to do with the failing of the government and the connecting it to the economy, the failure in combating COVID-19, which, by the way, we shouldn't brag about this here in the United States because we have the same issues as far as the Trump administration failing to combat COVID-19. But in particular, when I was doing my research and reading, the areas that have been affected the most are like the banlieue, which are the suburbs, neighborhoods which are poor in general. A lot of immigrants live there, and the government has failed them terribly. I mean, they're far more. They don't get now all the services, resources, whatever. And of course, these neighborhoods are inhabited. The majority of the people who live there are either from North Africa or Africa, and are by and large Muslims. So I feel he's trying to cover his failure by by labeling Muslims as terrorists. I mean, it's like, we gotta liberate them from the foreign intervention, when the failure of his government is killing them in France.
Yeah. Definitely. During the COVID-19, we've seen, and unfortunately in France, we are kind of facing the second wave of COVID-19, so it's not over yet. But in the first wave, we saw that the people that were the more targeted by the COVID-19, unfortunately, were the, let's say, working class, middle class people, and indeed people living in the banlieue that you talked about, in the suburbs, and what you can say is the denunciation of basically the non-action of the government when it comes to when it comes to put an end to these inequalities, to these social inequalities, when you have in some suburbs of Paris really a nightmare in the hospitals, because they don't have enough medical staff to face the COVID. And yes, because obviously it's people that live in this kind of neighborhoods. They are in small apartments. They live in with a certain numbers of siblings. They have much more interaction, and I mean, non-inevitable interaction between each others. And finally, they are the people that are left behind in comparison with the more wealthier. So yes, definitely, it is certainly one. It is certainly a means from the French government to try to, let's say, abrogate this social crisis by bringing something more important, which is the public enemy number one, which is Islam, and which eventually, or the Muslims.
So the failure of the government and COVID-19 are not the public enemy number one, and you have to divert them to Muslims. I mean, I think you framed it just right. I mean, that's the way I see it, and it's really disappointing to see that President Macron taking this attitude, because again, for me, someone who lives outside, I was used to seeing this language from Marine Le Pen and her father. Now, we have a few minutes left. What's your message, really? What's your message? Because we know now this bill is not a law. It has not been adopted yet, right? And then you guys are trying to stop it from becoming a law, because then it becomes very dangerous. So what's your message to people living in France and outside?
Okay, like you said, the bill is not passed yet, but we know it will. It will definitely be enshrined into the French legislation. This is why we are moving right now. That we are trying to urge for the debate and to review this freedom-destroying law, because it clearly violates numbers of international texts and conventions. Just to give you quickly, because I know we have just a few minutes, just to tell you briefly, this bill, if it is passed, it will change the notion of neutrality. It means that from now in France, only the civil servants are submitted to the notion of neutrality, religious neutrality, right? But if the bill passes, the private law persons will also be subject to the notion of neutrality. It means, for example, that in France right now, if you are a civil servant, means a professor or a fireman or a police officer, you cannot wear the hijab, or you cannot wear any religious cloths or sign. It means that now with this law, it won't only be the civil servants, it can also be the users of civil services. And this is super dangerous, because it means that that if you want to use a public service, you will have to withdraw your religious sign. So it means, in the end, no religion at all in the public sphere. So this is dangerous. There is also another element in this bill. If it passes, it's the change into the notion of laicity. They want to change the notion of laicity. They want to reinforce it. They want to reinforce the supervision of I would say Muslim organizations. Yeah, of organizations, but obviously it's Muslim organizations. They won't be ready. They want, for example, the labelization of imam. It means that basically they want the imam, so the religious leaders of the Muslims, to be chosen and trained by the state.
Wow, by the government. I mean,
because they wanted to be trained by the CFCM.
So there goes the separation of state and church, right? They basically
that goes totally against it. Mm-hmm. You know it. So they wanted to finally reverse it. They want to totally reverse this notion of laicity. So this to bring quickly the stuff. Another element, another dangerous element is that they want the end of homeschooling. Homeschooling. They want the end of homeschooling for all pupils and students in order to fight against radicalization and in order to fight against racism. So in France, they think that to fight against radicalization, you have to stop homeschooling. So this is this kind of stuff that you will find into the bill if it passes.
And you have a feeling that it will pass? I mean, it looks like you're kind of throwing the towel on this.
I don't throw the towel. I would never. But I it's not that I have a feeling. I have a certitude. I know that it will pass. But I know also that we, civil society or the academics or everybody, the citizens, can do something within France and outside France. We can do something to renegotiate the terms of the bill. And if we renegotiate of the bill, we can try to save, literally saying in French, we would say save the furniture, sauver les meubles. We can try this, but eventually, yes, the law will pass. Sorry.
Well, I hope it doesn't, because it sounds terrible. And I mean, I went to a French Catholic school and they used to teach us liberté, égalité, fraternité. And so this is all out of the window, basically. So the French can stop acting that they are fighting for people's freedom, because they just basically want to control one minority group in France, which is very disappointing. I want to thank you. I want to thank you again. You've been listening to Chafika Attalai. Chafika is the international project manager at CCIF, Collectif Contre L'Islamophobie en France. Go to their website. What's your website quickly, Chafika?
www.islamophobie.net.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jamal.
That's Chafika Attalai from CCIF, speaking with us about some very disturbing developments in France, Jamal. And I think, as we said before, that it seems like there are multiple pandemics, not just a pandemic of COVID-19 in France and in Europe, but a pandemic to target, to isolate, to scapegoat, again, Muslims in Europe and in France. Again, here we go again. So it seems like Macron's playbook is not that different from the Trump playbook, which is not that different from the Netanyahu playbook. It seems like all of these politicians, Jamal, who are suffering from catastrophic leadership, are using attacks on Arabs and Muslims as their ticket somehow to get out of their political morass.
Exactly, and it's almost comical in a sad way, Jess, because we've witnessed this before. We've been I've been following the news in France and Islamophobia in France since Sarkozy time.
Right.
This is when also Sarkozy wanted to pull something out of his sleeve during his election campaign, and again, it has something to do with his popularity rating, and then he came up with the burqa ban, even though, there are a lot of Muslims in France, but very few of them work the burqa, they work the hijab. So he came up with this law, and they have this older law, which is the laïcité, which is basically bans religious symbols from public and government institutions. So technically, if you are wearing a hijab, you cannot be there. If you're wearing a cross, which they don't enforce, you should not be there. If you're working a kippah or a yarmulke on your head, then the same thing should apply to you. But for some reason, Sarkozy targeted Muslims, and that's why he elevated that laïcité law into the burqa, because he didn't want to antagonize the Jewish community with the kippah. He didn't want to antagonize the Catholics wearing the cross. Now, fast forward to Macron. Macron came as, well, she describes him as a centrist, but he really tried to build himself as a liberal, which he was not.
He's no centrist and he's no liberal.
But, well, that's how he likes to be known as. And then he's using the same words of the far, far right, like exactly. Marie Le Pen and her father, which basically they are the face of, if there is such a thing as a French KKK,
right.
Marie Le Pen and her father were. But he's using the same language that they were using and trying to pass laws to deflect from his big failure combating, just like Donald Trump, the COVID-19, to deflect from the high unemployment and the crashing French economy. So, of course, the easy and soft target, let's target the 7 or 8% of the population of French Muslims.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jamal. And, they're an easy target. We know that Europe is kind of, and we are seeing this in Germany right now, especially with the far right reemerging as a strong political force. So we see the emergence of these white supremacy, far right, extremely xenophobic populations in Europe, the United States, and even among Israelis, whether it's settlers or the European colonists that are there right now, all kind of jumping on the same bandwagon right now. And each of these places, whether it's Netanyahu, Macron in Europe, and Trump in the United States, they're facing horrible leadership when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, significant, minus Germany for now, significant economic downturn and displacement economically. And, what are they going to do in terms of getting re-election and boosting their ratings? We have the same old scapegoat tactics. I fear, Jamal, I don't know how you feel about this. You've been monitoring the French press a little bit more. We see it here in the United States. We see it in Europe. France seems to be in the midst of another extreme wave of the equivalent of, as you said, the KKK and white supremacy extremism, even in France.
Yes, and it has been for a while. There is a panic. And of course, like I said, this is the soft target. This is, go after the weakest link, which is usually minorities. In France, the population of Northern Africans, Arabs, and Muslims has been on the rise now for many years.
Right.
Some put it at 7%. There are even some other statistics that puts it closer to 10% of the population if you not only add Northern Africans, but also you add people from the Middle East, the latest wave of immigration from Syria and other places.
Right.
So the numbers have been, and of course from Africa, the numbers have been on the rise, and the economy has been going down. And so there is that panic. It's the same thing. When you have high unemployment, who do you blame it on? You blame it on immigrants. You blame it on people of color. And so now with the lockdown, even with the lockdown, just when people have lost a lot of their jobs, who do you think are out on the streets working, cleaning the streets, driving the transportation system, working in civil services, the front people? They're all immigrants. They have some sort of a job. So they're seeing, so the average French person who's just sitting, getting used to having their long weekends, they call them the bridged weekends, le pont, whatever. Now money is running out, and now the government, with President Macron, they're trying to shift the attention away from their failure to target these immigrants and say they are the problem. And by the way, this is something very important. Guess where you have the highest rate of infection of COVID and lack of services?
I would say the rural areas where there aren't as many immigrants. Yeah.
Exactly. That's called the banlieue area. That's where most the North Africans, Arabs, etc., Africans, they live there. And they are the suburbs. People, who like to play tourist, Americans, whatever. We go to France. It's beautiful Paris. We all love Paris, the Louvre, the Champs-Élysées, Saint-Germain-des-Prés. They don't continue on the train and go to Saint-Denis, for example. This is equivalent for me, this experience, because I've experienced both, having lived in New York. This is when I have lived in New York in the late 70s, when white people got off the train at 96th Street maximum, because after 96 came the 125th Street, basically inner Harlem, and all the white people didn't want to go to Harlem. So all the white people, all the good tourists, wherever, they stick around in the beautiful areas of Paris, but they don't see what's around Paris, which is the banlieue, poor neighborhoods, high unemployment, a lot of youth. And that's why a few years ago, if people can remember, you saw them demonstrating, burning tires and whatever. And so now in the midst of the pandemics, they're suffering the most. They have, because immigrants and poor people live in crowded places. So they'll have a 2-bedroom apartment with maybe 7-8 members of one family. And the French government has failed them again. But at the same time, instead of admitting this, they're shifting the attention and saying, we got to target Muslims because they're wearing the hijab. They recently, and this is, you'll hear from Chafika, you've heard from Chafika actually, about a Muslim student who was at the National Assembly, and then they staged a meeting because they saw her wearing hijab. Imagine like if you have a hijabi woman went into Congress and everybody staged a walkout because she did not fit in their dress code. So that's the situation there.
Well, I think, Jamal, what we're seeing, we're seeing an interesting shift globally right now, as well as locally here in the States. We see this kind of shift politically. There's a bit of a political pandemic and earthquake going on right now because of the rise of these extremist groups in Europe and the United States that have and among the Israelis. I mean, we're seeing European leaders, not so much Merkel of Germany, but other European leaders like Macron and in other places really fomenting this kind of division and kind of xenophobic attitude. We definitely see it in the United States. This is what I call Trump's last stand, by continuing to foment division and racial insecurities among people of color here in the United States. And as we kind of go into our segue into our next segment about Palestinian farmers who've been harvesting olives for hundreds and hundreds of years, Jamal, we see that settler colonial violence, even during the pandemic, when there's supposed to be a general lockdown of the entire historic Palestine right now, we see settler colonialists attacking Palestinian farmers who are trying to harvest what little they have of any kind of economic security by harvesting, their olives during the olive harvest. It's really hard to see this now, Jamal.
Yeah, and talking about the pandemic and harvest, and that's actually these settlers, and many of them are very religious zealots, they refuse to wear masks.
Right.
And they have the highest rate of infection. As a matter of fact, Israel leads the world per capita in the highest rate of infection.
There's one place that's closer, and that's the Hasidic Jewish community in Brooklyn and in New York also.
Okay, so these settlers, not only they go and physically assault and attack Palestinian farmers, many of them carry the COVID-19.
That's right.
And they go and scream and get into your face like half an inch away from your face and then physically assault you without wearing a mask. And so they are also responsible for spreading COVID to Palestinian communities. And these Palestinian communities, they have a very unique, I would say, micro kind of existence. They're isolated, small villages. So if you don't have an infection there, you're not going to have an infection because they don't interact with strangers and foreigners. They're basically foreigners. And then these guys descend from these settlements up the hills where they have usurped from them from before, and they go with clubs and stones and torches, and they guns. Try to and guns and chainsaws. They go and to cut down the olive trees. Sometimes they set them on fire. So we've been seeing a major increase. And talking about settlements, Jess, this is the other part of it. You know, now what I forgot. I lost track of time. It's been 3 weeks now since that, or 4 weeks since that big bonanza and extravaganza in the White House.
Oh, you mean the Grand Peace Plan between the United States and UAE? Plan.
Yeah, and with that pretense that this is going to bring peace to the Middle East, bring peace between Palestinians and Israelis, and Israel was going to stop the annexation of Palestinian land. Now, guess what? Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just recently ordered a convening about a week and a half ago of the Planning Commission of the Civil Administration, that's the name of it, with the aim of approving extensive constructions in the West Bank.
Here we go.
Over to the extent of 5,400 housing units in a dozen of locales, and which is totally just like a stab in the eye of those who talk about, or basically the emir of the UAE talking about freezing the settlements.
Well, he talked about doing this for the Palestinians because it was going to help them.
And a new report just was released by the Israeli Peace Now movement, showing figures and numbers and putting as the year 2020, and the year is not over. We're only mid-October. This has been the highest numbers of new housing or settlements being built by the Israeli occupation for the past decade. That's the highest number. So this is the year that they've been talking about this great peace plan, and Jared Kushner saying, they're gonna preserve some of the land for the Palestinians and trying to save the two-state solution. It's nonsense. This is by the Israelis' own reports. They, from the government, is rushing in 5,400 new units, trying to finish them before the end of the year. Peace Now movement is telling you this has been the highest number of settlement building activities since 10 years ago.
Yeah, Jamal, but I think part of this has to do with they are anticipating that Donald Trump may lose, and that Kushner-Trump kind of political motivation to give the Israelis whatever they want may come to an end. Not that Biden is any better, but Biden and his kind of traditional State Department approach to the region, he could very well put a stop or a slowdown to the settlement expansion among the Israelis. There's no guarantee that Netanyahu is going to be around next year anyways. Who knows what's going to happen to him? So I think you see among the Israelis, Jamal, the same thing you see among the Trump bootlickers and Trump himself. These are desperate, scared people who anticipate that they're going to lose, and they have to take, extract, and steal as much as they can right now before the election or before Netanyahu leaves.
I think you hit the nail right on the head, just with this. There is like a major land grab, a big rush to grab as much as possible. There is a colonial fest going on. And that's what they're trying to do because, also at the same time, there are demonstrations, anti-Netanyahu demonstrations all over Israel. So he knows his time is running. He's running out of time. And then they're unsure about what's going to happen with the elections, and we saw that with the RNC, with the Republican Party, trying to ram through, the nomination of a Supreme Court judge.
Right.
Even though they were the ones to object to President Obama, telling him that he needed to wait for the new president or the new administration to make that. There is this mad rush in going about this, and Jess, and of course we have a few minutes to talk about the COVID situation here. And,
let me just say about
the elections.
Let me just say they're really intimately connected, Jamal, because the failure of leadership among the Trump administration and the catastrophic leadership around their COVID response has resulted in a massive uptick in the number of infections. 45 of 50 states in the union right now, Jamal, are experiencing increases, and at least 5 or 6 of the states, their infection rates are so high right now that the number of hospitalizations that are occurring in right now are at peak levels. Wisconsin, Utah, Midwest, the Dakotas, and we're really at the beginning edge, Jamal, of a real significant uptick. We're talking about a second wave that's going to be hitting the United States. We have 8 million people who have been infected. That's low. We have 200 and almost 20,000 people who have perished that didn't need to perish. And we still have a president and a vice president who are saying we've rounded the corner and things are better. So
this is the mind-boggling. Just how do you reconcile this with the picture and the sound of Donald Trump saying, "Look at me, it's nothing. I got sick. I'm fine.
I'll tell you,
my
Jamal,
son got sick. He's fine."
But let me tell you,
he was dancing to the tunes of the Village People.
Right. Well, let me tell you something. If you or I took dexamethasone, if we took a steroid, no matter how sick we were, we would probably be dancing to the Village People also, Jamal. Because steroids, that's why bodybuilders and certain people take steroids, because it gives you a false sense of power and good feeling. So that's going to wear off eventually, Jamal.
He was saying, maybe I'm Superman. That's what
he wanted to wear a Superman outfit and, open up his shirt to show a Superman outfit, but his staff talked him out of it. This is a scary picture, just because here we're going through a second wave, and you counted 42 states now are back. They have retreated with increases instead of improving. And now he's just giving this image. Don't worry about COVID-19. I survived it. No,
you can survive it too.
Don't let it control you, Jamal. This is the President of the United States says, don't let the virus control you. As if human beings can control their own infection. So
briefly, we have a few minutes. How will this play? Because we're around the corner. By next week, we'll only have less than 2 weeks for the elections, basically. And people have been voting in advance.
Here's what we're seeing, Jamal. We're seeing the largest number of absentee and mail-in voting occur in the history of the United States. By far, the number of people that are voting by mail and absentees appear to be Democrats. We have 19 days till the election, that first Tuesday in November, and in 19 days you're gonna see the numbers for the COVID pandemic exposure be exploding even more. So I think tragically that more Americans will die, more Americans will get infected, and the reality of the Trump administration will unfortunately come to a painful realization to many people. I'm still not counting Donald Trump out of this, Jamal. Don't get me wrong, because the voter suppression is out of control right now. But we're going to see some really horrible numbers on infections and deaths in the United States before the election in November.
Well, we're coming to another end of Arab Talk. Make sure you go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest episodes. And we will be talking about the elections in the next 2 weeks. And we will be receiving, by the way, just a report from Washington, D.C., from Arab Talk, Phil Pasquini.
Excellent.
Who's now in D.C., and he'll be reporting right there from around the White House in the next, hopefully the next couple of weeks, but definitely on election day.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.